Hello and welcome to this week's This Is MediaCity. I'm Stephen Chapman, and on today's podcast we have got Iain MacLeod, who is the creative director of continuing drama for ITV and ITV Studios. That means he's in charge of Coronation Street and Emmerdale. Iain MacLeod, thank you ever so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
This is MediaCity. Now, you're not at MediaCity, but you are. You're part of our family,
yes.
Extended family.
I think we'd very much consider ourselves to be part of MediaCity, albeit we're technically in Trafford and we're on the wrong side of the water. But no,
unless you're from Trafford and then you're on the right side of the water.
Of
obviously.
course, yeah. I meant purely from a MediaCity point of view. Yeah, nothing wrong with Trafford. But no, I think we would certainly consider ourselves MediaCity. Yeah.
And it's been a brilliant move for you guys because you've come all the way over from Quay Street. You rebuilt it. You were one of the first guys over here when it was all kicking off.
Canaries in the coal mine.
Yeah, and it's been going very well for you over there because you've been able to kind of rebuild the set because it was at Granada for a very long time before you
Certainly was, yeah, 50 odd years. And yet brand spanking new to a point, but we did export quite a lot of the original dressing and put it onto the new site. So there's a high proportion of the cobbles are from the original Coronation Street. We tried to repurpose a lot of the building materials for the houses. And actually you wouldn't guess it was new either because even down to on one of the houses there's a bit of graffiti that Dennis Tanner chiselled into a windowsill in before the show even aired in the 1950s, and somebody had to painstakingly recreate that. So it certainly doesn't feel new. We were very cautious that we wanted it to feel exactly the same as the old place, really. And there were quite a lot of smoke and mirrors went on with that as well, because for example, you don't get seagulls at Quay Street, Manchester City Centre. There aren't any.
No.
Whereas being over here with the waterway, there's quite a lot of seagulls. So before we moved from Granada to the new site, we started getting our dubbing mixers to gradually start adding more and more seagulls onto the stuff that was filmed at Granada, so that when we came over here and there were lots of seagulls, suddenly it didn't feel like the soundtrack had completely shifted. So there was so much care and attention went into making it as indistinguishable from the old place as possible.
There's a massive wall as well to one side.
Yep.
Is that to do with the Science and Industry Museum and things like that?
Yes, it is. If you look down towards the bistro, above that is the tram line, where the tram famously came off the tracks in the 50th anniversary episode. And behind that is one of the walls of... Oh, in fact, no, that used to be Studio 1 behind there.
Granada Studio 1.
But yeah, there's lots of bits of it that we had to replicate that were purely Science Museum or purely old studio buildings, and we had to integrate those into our new visual landscape. There's things we have to paint out now quite a lot, or frame out. So the War Museum, again, if you look down Coronation Street towards the bistro, on the actual site there's the huge edifice of the War Museum, which didn't exist at Quay Street. So we try and either frame that out, or sometimes if we can't avoid it, we get somebody in with their post-production pencil and they get rid of it for us. So it's occasionally throws up challenges, even now being on the new site, but we're quite bedded in by this point.
Right. Although you're in charge of Coronation Street and Emmerdale, we're not necessarily going into storylines. I want to find a bit more about you, and the best way to do that, we discovered, is with our secret yellow cards to start with, where it's random questions to find out a bit more about you.
I'm going to go over here. I don't know why.
Go for the side.
What does it say? This is like, I feel like I'm Would I Light. Best piece of advice. Try to carry on consuming stuff that has nothing to do with your day job, by which I mean... what I do, I spend a lot of my time reading scripts for Coronation Street at Emmerdale or storylines for Coronation Street and Emmerdale, and you can become very snowblind with it, or you can't see the wood for the trees. And in order to keep your storytelling fresh and your narrative voice fresh, I sort of almost force myself as homework to read books, to watch other drama, even if I'm like, oh gosh, I'm tired, I've been reading scripts for 4 hours, it's now 10 p.m, I probably should just go to bed. I will carve out some time to read a novel or read a factual book, or watch something on Netflix, and push yourself outside your normal consumption patterns just to keep what you're doing fresh. And it gives you a comparative for what you're doing. You can see, well, I think what I'm doing is great, but how does it compare to this or that or the other? That would be my advice, is carry on forcing yourself to consume things that have nothing to do with your day job.
Fab, I'll give you one more.
Right, I'll go this one.
Go for middle.
Says. Biggest claim to fame. Goodness me, that's a tricky one. Let's see.
You've had a few celebrities on the street.
We've had a few celebrities on the street. I've got a couple actually. First might be when I first took over Corrie as producer, I arrived and an early email I received was confirming the casting of Maureen Lipman.
Oh, yeah.
And you do just think, my goodness, this is quite the coup. And so I can't claim any credit for that. It was our fabulous casting team in Jenny Radcliffe predominantly and the outgoing producer, Kate Oates. But my goodness, what a casting. And working with Maureen has been a real privilege and she's a hell of a character. So I don't know if that's a claim to fame or not, but it was certainly one of my most exciting days at the office. And then in my previous life, I used to work as a radio producer. And so, like, I've met all of Girls Aloud. I've interviewed Jerry Halliwell. I once asked Peter Andre who would win in a fight between him and David Beckham, and he was heavily backing himself. So I've met a lot of kind of, let's say, is this disparaging? Sort of. No, I've met Spice Girls. They're huge stars. I was going to say mid-tier pop stars, but no, they're huge. So, I've done a lot of that. I've hosted a radio roadshow at Blackburn's Ewood Park. For some reason, at various points, I've met a lot of pop stars. Yeah.
Shall I try to grab those from you?
Yeah, do it.
So, how do you go from a radio producer to where you are now? Was that was there a deliberate move there, or
sort of? I mean, there was some good fortune, as there is, I think, in most people's stories. If you end up in a job like mine, there's an element of good luck there. But I trained as a journalist originally, and what I came to realise later in my career is journalism and storytelling and drama are not that dissimilar. It's all about hooking the audience in, giving them the right amount of information at each stage of the piece to make sure that you retain their interest. All of that kind of thing. Journalism's a bit back to front. You tend to give people all the big stuff at the start and then flesh it out. Whereas drama, you tend to give people the intriguing stuff at the beginning and then hit them with the point at the end. So it's upside down, but essentially similar. So I started to realise that my skills were transferable into television. I was working in commercial radio. Anyone out there that has worked in commercial radio knows it's even then, 20 odd years ago, it was tough times, you know, and especially now they've networked virtually everything and there's no regional jobs really left in commercial radio. I started to see the writing was on the wall. So I was producing a breakfast show at the time, and I saw this job advert for Coronation Street script editor. And I had absolutely no idea what a script editor was, I'll be honest with you. I was a radio person through and through, knew I loved Corrie, grew up watching soaps and thought, I'll apply for that. You know, I'm sure I won't get it, but at least I might get in a room with somebody that will be able to give me some advice. So I applied for it. Got called in for the interview, and the interview opened with, you're hopelessly unqualified for this job, but I just liked the look of your CV, and I thought I'd get you in for a chat. And this is where the good fortune came in. He said, you're not going to get this, but there's an assistant researcher position going on Coronation Street. It's part-time, 4 hours a day. It won't pay the bills, but if you want it, it would be a really good route into the editorial team. You'll get to see how it all works. So for about a year and a half, I had to do that in tandem with my radio job. So I'd wake up at 3:30 in the morning, travel to my breakfast show, work on that till 1 in the afternoon, drive to Manchester, start work there at 2, and then do 4 hours of research until 6, and then go home and then question my life choices because it was an exhausting period. But it just, from there, it was just about grafting and showing willing and trying to go over and above what was required, I suppose. And I enjoyed being a researcher. It made me a pub quiz ninja, basically, because on a soap, you know everything from obscure medical conditions to sort of arcane legal terminology to what wig particular people are wearing in a courtroom to, all of this kind of stuff. So I became really good at pub quizzes, but became a really good researcher using, I think, my journalism skills. And then just kind of bullied my way into the storyline team, and then the rest is history, really.
So what is storylining? Because you did that for, was it about a year or so?
More than that, I think. Yeah, I think I started in the story team in about 2007, and I think I only finally left that until in 2012, so 6 years or so.
Right.
What is storylining? It's funny, it doesn't really exist on anything other than soaps particularly, but on a soap at least, the way it works is you have a monthly story meeting which all the writers attend, the script writers and all the storyline writers, and the producer sits and listens and contributes and steers that discussion. And at the end of this 2-day meeting, in theory at least, you know what you are going to do for the next month of storylines. But it's all very nebulous. It's just, 100 pages of minutes from that meeting, and somebody needs to refine that into a shape and put it into episodes and work out what pace things will play out at. And that's what the storyline writers do. So they take this big cloud of ideas, some fully formed, some barely formed, and they essentially write the novel on which the screenplay is based. So they'll write a 180-page document in prose that deals with each episode, what happens within it, scene by scene. That then gets sent to the script writers who turn it into a screenplay, write all the dialogue. So it's a great skill to have, actually, because let's say you want to start writing your own project, your own drama, and you want it to be a 9-part drama. Knowing how to assemble this huge sprawl of ideas you've got into acts and parts and episodes, and make sure all the story hooks are in the right place and it's paced correctly, and you don't have an episode in the middle where nothing happens, or have an episode in the middle where everything happens and it's too much to take in and the pace is too quick. So yeah, being a storyline writer is really the foundational skill of my whole career, I think, actually. And to kick it all the way back down the road, I think being a journalist helps a lot as well, because concision, clarity, knowing what information you want to impart when, and how to pace the telling of stories, all originated back in my journalism training. So journalism followed by storyline writing is in large part why I'm sitting on this sofa today, I think.
Oh, that's amazing. And I'm assuming when you've done the storylining, presumably the next step up is writing the scripts in terms of a career progression, or do some people just stay in storylining?
Some people do. You get people that are specialists in that regard, and for example, in the Coronation Street story office, there's somebody still working in there in a senior capacity, but was one of my staff when I was the boss of that team, which was 13 years ago, and she's still in there. So some people, it's just a passion, and it's probably one of the places where you can have the most direct impact on what goes on the TV. If you speak to people that work in other forms of drama, sometimes they'll spend years developing something that never goes near a camera, and then they have to start again. Whereas if you work in the storyline team of a soap, your idea that you have on January the 4th, 2026 can be on the TV in June the 24th, 2026. So it's an incredibly satisfying place to be if you like to see your work actually realised and your work on the telly.
And pressure, I imagine, because the turnaround's fast.
It certainly is fast, yeah. You'd think, 3 weeks to write, a month of storylines, that's surely, that's plenty, isn't it? And it is, but the number of revisions they go through tends to be quite high, because, the storyline writer will have their interpretation of what arose from the story conference, the big storyline meetings we have, but it might not accord perfectly with what the producer would have wanted to do with the same set of raw materials. So it's really not uncommon to work incredibly hard on a storyline, and you turn it into the likes of me, and I'll read it and go, it's the best possible version of what you set out to do, but now I've seen it in black and white, I realise it's not actually what I want to do, so we're going to have to start again, and I'm really sorry, let's talk about how that might work. So again, I'll keep... That's
your university degree in psychology coming through, isn't it?
You have to do a lot of... you do have to be, you have to be kind, and I'm a big believer in that. You catch more flies with honey than whatever the other unpleasant substance is. I'm not sure that's strictly the correct version of that little idiom, is it? But you know what I mean? I tend to think people are busting their behinds to give you the very best of what they want for the show, and they care about it every bit as deeply as I do. So to come in and say, I don't like any of that, which is sometimes the bottom line of what I'm saying, you have to manage it carefully and make sure you pick out things that people have done well and done right. Otherwise, it can be quite dispiriting. And it's difficult. Again, I keep coming back to my journalism background, but in journalism, you cannot be precious, because you write something, it either gets used or it doesn't, and then it's in the bin and it's on to the next thing. It's quite brutal. You can't get too attached to the glorious verbiage you've attached to your writing, because your editor might hate it and it goes straight in the bin. So I came up via a system where even if I thought what I'd done was great, you can't afford to be too precious about it. So I had to remind myself twice to be kind to people that haven't come up with that discipline, because some people came through let's say, an English literature degree, or they've done a creative writing master's, and they have a different set of sensibilities to what I might have had as a former journalist. Because, you know, journalism, my dad was a journalist. It's a bit of a cliche, but we were a little bit more hard-boiled than your classic creative writing graduate, I think, probably. So
you're used to being shouted at a bit more by an editor, aren't you?
Absolutely right, yes.
So you've went through the writing and became story editor as well. We're talking like thousands of episodes you worked on here. And then you moved over to, I think it was Hollyoaks for a bit.
It was indeed Hollyoaks, yes.
How was that change between Corrie and, because you became series producer at Hollyoaks?
Yeah, it started as series editor and then became producer quite quickly after that. What was that like? Culture shock, I think it's fair to say.
Because you've gone from big ITV,
Yep.
I know Line Pictures, big company, but it's a slightly different way, and it's Channel 4 as well.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it was very different. I mean, Corrie had the advantage of having been running by that point for about 53 years.
Yeah.
So they kind of had the running of the machine down to a T. You know, it was very smooth. The protocols and systems were fairly fail-safe. There was a lot of latency built in. So if you, for any reason, had to pull a storyline out abruptly because you couldn't transmit it anymore, which does happen, there was ample time to rework that and put something else in its place. Hollyoaks was a lot more hand to mouth. It was a lot more now. Everything has to happen yesterday. But it was exhilarating, and you know, I've worked there for 2 years, and I know many other people that have worked there for a long time. And I always say, I think I learnt more in 6 months on Hollyoaks than I learnt in 6 years on Corrie. Just in terms of the kind of everything that can go wrong will go wrong side of it, you know, because what they achieve on the budget they achieve it on and the schedule within which they have to work is astonishing. And Hollyoaks gives you this kind of sense of indestructibility, which is, if I watch something on a Thursday that I think isn't fit for transmission, and it's supposed to be on the telly next week, we can still turn that around. We can reshoot that. We can redo this. We can recast them. And you just get into this... you suddenly realise that actually nothing's finished till it's on the TV. In lots of other places where I've worked, it's sort of like, well, it's too late now, and it's like, but it doesn't transmit for 2 months. Like we could reshoot the whole lot if we wanted to, but there's a reluctance to do that, very understandably, on other shows. But on Hollyoaks, it's like everything they put out, they feel, and they're right, has to be the very best it can be. And if anyone over there comes out of a viewing and is like, I don't know, that was all right, but I think the performances weren't as good as they might have been, or the stunt didn't work quite as well as it should have, they feel emboldened to just go, we'll do it again, and we'll get it right, and we'll make it better. And that was really exciting, I have to say.
That's unbelievable, really, because the turnaround, as we've just mentioned beforehand, is tight on a soap regardless, isn't it? And to do that
but they're so good at it, you know, and Hollyoaks, they, I think, sometimes get very unfairly maligned. The quality of what they put out within the confines that they face is astonishing, and some of the proudest stuff I've ever worked on was things I've made on Hollyoaks, and partly that pride comes from, I know how much harder it is to make stuff like that within their production structure. And they continue to do an amazing job. Like Hannah Cheers, who's the exec over there at the moment, is one of my good friends, and she does absolute wonders with what she's got in front of her. So good for them. I tend to come out swinging when people go in on Hollyoaks, because I think it's a fantastic show. And it's fantastic even if you forget about how difficult it is for them to make it. But when you bear that in mind, it's they deserve every award going, I would say.
And the other thing is that after that, presumably the call came in to cross the Pennines after that today, because you went. There seems to be quite a lot of people kind of move between the three northern soaps, don't they?
Yes.
But you went over to Emmerdale after Hollyoaks, was that right?
Indeed, I did. Yeah.
How was that change?
It was instantly reassuring to see that it was an easier show to make. I was back in a world where they had the benefit of that incredibly long history of production. It was incredibly smooth running. The relationships between the editorial team and the production team, who have to work hand in glove with each other wherever you're making drama, but especially in a soap, if there's any friction there or one team is pulling against the other, things can go wrong very quickly. But it was just incredibly smooth. really talented bunch of writers and storyline writers over there, some of whom I knew anyway, so there was an element of homecoming to it. So it's lovely going to Emmerdale, and what I liked the most about going to Emmerdale, having done Coronation Street and then Hollyoaks, is that Emmerdale's narrative universe sits somewhere in the middle of those two extremes. So Corrie, certainly then and even so now, is probably the most grounded of those three. You know, the viewers expect there to be an element of realism there, albeit slightly heightened, and they want their characters and their stories to have one foot on terra firma. Hollyoaks is way more at home in the wild excesses of crazy soap storytelling, and I love them for it. But you know, Hollyoaks is the home of the returning evil twin and extreme gothic madness, a lot of which I think we did brilliantly when I was there, and they continue to do well now. And Emmerdale's somewhere in the middle, so you have that kind of historical them and us type thing with the posh people up at home farm and the working class people in the village, and that is slightly Corrie-esque. But then you also have big gothic kind of evil doers like Chris Tate and Kim Tate and all of that sort of stuff. So Emmerdale allowed me to sort of exercise a brilliant blend of everything I'd learned at Corrie and everything I'd learned at Hollyoaks. And we had I'm blowing my own trumpet now, it's not all down to me, I promise, but we had an outrageously successful time when I was there. And a lot of that was because I was borrowing stuff / nicking stuff that we'd done at Hollyoaks. So I think for the first time in Emmerdale, there was a storyline where Belle Dingle, for those of you that watch, was going through a psychotic break, and we allowed the viewers to see with their own eyes the kind of manifestation of her psychosis. So she was hallucinating that her dead friend was tormenting her because she was still feeling some residual guilt over her friend's death, and we actually saw her friend. The viewers saw her friend rather than her just in a Belle in a room talking to herself. So we externalized people's mental states, and we put in some very non-linear devices where we started a week of episodes with a funeral. We didn't know who was in the coffin, and then we rewound to the start of the week, and then the viewers were invited to enjoy the drama, working out which of these people they love is going to end up in the coffin at the end. And we really sort of ripped up the rule book for what soaps and sort of the quote-unquote mainstream soaps had done. And that was purely me blending Corrie and Hollyoaks together, and the viewers really, really loved it, thankfully.
Well, we've had Brookie and Hollyoaks together. We've had Emmerdale and Corrie together. The Hollyoaks, the Channel 4 ITV crossover, that's the one we're waiting for, surely.
Well, we've got enough common acquaintances between the two shows to do that, I would imagine. One of the most tricky things with blending, obviously, as you alluded to there, we blended Corrie and Emmerdale for CorrieDale.
Yeah.
Lining up your production schedules, what a nightmare that is. I hadn't anticipated that, because one show is slightly further ahead than the other show, and working out how you're going to arrive these two sets of cast at the same place in the production schedule when they're actually filming episodes that are all over the place when you compare the two schedules together was a right headache. Thankfully not one that I had to solve myself. But,
I bet you were glad you weren't in the storyline team then.
Crikey, yeah, in the scheduling office. The schedulers, they are... I don't know. People talk about AI, but I think schedulers must have had some kind of AI NVIDIA chip implanted in them 20 years ago, because the stuff they do defies belief. But yeah, the logistics of blending with Hollyoaks would be extremely challenging, I think. So we might have to leave
not
that
least
one.
from a broadcaster point of view.
Yes.
But that's while we're on CorrieDale, let's talk about that and the logistics thereof. But you've got two shows massively high. Lots of people watching, and CorrieDale was a huge success as well.
Yeah.
At what stage do you say, let's blend these together? What process was that? This is an idea.
Well, it's something that floats to the surface every 5 years or so. Somebody will have the bright idea to do it. And I think historically, there's always been a fear that the viewers wouldn't accept that it's too non-traditional. There'd have to be too high a level of contrivance to get these two sets of characters together narratively. Like, what on earth would they be doing in the same place at the same time? And there'd been a little hint of it occasionally for things like Text Santa, which was ITV's Christmas charity drive, where they'd had a couple of cast from Corrie appear in the wall pack for some fun and games. And I think the consensus, and I would have agreed with it at the time, was, yeah, that's enough. I don't know that the viewers will accept this. It's too much. But what we have found since the pandemic is that soap viewers, albeit probably still maybe slightly more traditional than viewers of other drama, have started to become more eclectic in their viewing habits. They, the example I often give is like, even my 78-year-old mother has watched Squid Game now, so it's not not typically a show that a 78-year-old might have watched before the pandemic, but when you're stuck at home and you're running out of things to watch, people started taking in all kinds of other different types of show. And we've done a lot of market research that shows that our viewers, however traditional they may appear, are way more accepting of slightly odder things, different narrative, non-linear narrative devices and non-literal presentations, like, as I said, seeing Belle's hallucination. People are now more accepting of that. And so when I took over initially as exec producer across Emmerdale and Coronation Street...
You're now creative director.
I am now creative director, indeed. Very highfalutin. When I took over in the exec role, I was thinking, well, what can we do? Obviously, we want to keep making as big a noise as we can about these shows. Yes, they've been going for 115 years between the two of them or thereabouts, but we want to still remain relevant and current and fresh, and what haven't we done before? And it doesn't take long to land on, well, could we blend them? And it was a bit of a punt in a way, and because historically we'd always thought the viewers won't like it, but I thought, I think now's the time. So it was probably about a year and a half in the gestation, but the more we went on, the more convinced I was that this is going to be great. As soon as I'd written the story outline for it, and I was like, as a soap fan, first and foremost, how am I not going to enjoy that? And we tried really hard to make it enjoyable even for people that only watch one or the other, so there was enough inherent entertainment value in each side of it that even if you don't know who on earth Kane Dingle is, in which case, by the way, where have you been? That even if you don't know who Kane Dingle is, you should have, we hoped, had enough in there to enjoy without that knowledge. So we worked on it really hard. We tried to get the balance right. We wanted it to be a big spectacle. Obviously, some people I know will feel like it would have been so much better if there'd just been an inter-county pub quiz and the Dingles would all gone to the Rovers, and I would have loved that as well, but I tend to feel...
You may as well hit them each other in a car, mightn't you?
Exactly. So we took the view that, we may well, or almost certainly will, only do this once. And what I wouldn't want to do is look back in a few years and go, I wish we'd gone in more full beans rather than sort of just tiptoe around the periphery of it. So we went right at it, pulled out all of the fancy kit that we could to make it look as cinematic as possible. And it was just really good fun, actually. And we did a lot of night shoots, and night shoots are generally not that fun, especially not in winter. But everyone had a fantastically good time. And the results I'm really pleased with. And as you say, from a viewing figures point of view, I think it ended up settling at about 5.9 million, which in this day and age is...
That's not bad, is it?
Pretty good. If you bear in mind, in the whole of last year, Netflix didn't have a single episode of a single show that settled above 3 million after the same interval. So it's a pretty big thing that we've done. And I'm only now starting to really breathe and go, oh, that was good, that, because it was a lot in the making of it. You didn't really have time to stop and smell the roses too much.
There was an element I noticed online of people kind of going that reason that the Team GB don't play football in the Olympics. They like saying, does this mean it's it? Is this the start of the merger between the two soaps? From what you're saying, no.
No. Well, I think that the other thing we had to work quite hard at was that the two shows do have a very different editorial voice and different sensibility, and the types of story they tell are different. And we had to tiptoe quite carefully through the minefield of blending it together and making sure that it didn't feel like some horrible Frankenstein's monster of two disparate halves. And it just wouldn't work to do it longer term. The dramatic milieu is very different. One's very urban, one's very rural. Emmerdale's much more gothic and crazy, and Corrie is, for the most part, much more grounded. It just wouldn't work. And also, if you've got two incredibly successful brands, why would you blend them together? I don't know that it would end up being more than the sum of its parts if you did it long term. So there's really no... doesn't make any sense from my point of view to do it more permanently. I know everybody's like, I know you're saying you're not going to do CorrieDale again, but surely you'll do CorrieDale too. But my fear is a lot of the joy of the first iteration was that you'd never seen it before. And I just don't know that if you did it again, firstly, there wouldn't be the same level of excitement because you've seen it before. So that would immediately lower people's engagement levels before they'd watched it. And secondly, it would inevitably be compared to the first time, and people would find fault with it in some way. And I don't know, I just tend to think sometimes one and done is great. And, you know, obviously if the network come back and they are my paymasters, if they say you must do it, then, you know, they're the customer and they'll get what they want. But they're making no noises about it either. And I think they agree with me that it would just be diminishing returns. So, yeah, unfortunately for everyone that's clamouring to see it again, it's unlikely to happen, I would say.
Fair enough. You mentioned a bit about the car crash, about going big and all the rest of it. What is your favourite type of story? Or what would you say, if you look back, I mean, you've been doing this for 20 years now, what is your, do you have a signature kind of thing that you like to do? Is it massive explosions, or is it like the psychological stuff, or what?
I much prefer a kind of slow burn psychological story, I have to say. And the two that I think I've enjoyed the most, they're tonally very different. And enjoy is not the right word when you hear what I'm about to say, but okay. the Jeff Yasmin coercive control story is one of the stories I'm proudest of, and that's, I suppose, for two reasons. Number one, I think it was very well told, which is obviously not all down to me by any stretch, but I think the pacing of it was bang on. The evolution of those characters across the story was really well paced. It also had just enough excitement in it. So a kind of social issue driven story can be really worthy and really dry, but actually I think the balance that the story team and the writers got so right with that was, yes, we were telling the social issue side of it, the abuse side of it, really responsibly, but it also had quite a lot of thrillerish excitement in it without it feeling in poor taste. So I think that, in terms of a long runner that engaged the audience in a way I've never seen before, was something I'm very proud of. And then the second element of why I'm so proud of it is the kind of social good that I think it did. And obviously, predominantly when we make drama, we're not setting out to, I don't know, wag our finger at the UK and teach them a lesson about something important. But sometimes that does happen naturally with the stories you tell. And just the outpouring of people saying that this echoes my life to the extent that I've now escaped an abusive relationship and I've now sought help from refuge, and I'm free and my partner is being prosecuted, and the charities that we work with would give us figures about the uptick in the number of people that had reached out to their support services, and it would be a hundreds and hundreds of % increase. It sounds like a Donald Trump statistic, doesn't it? But it would be, it would have 6 or 7-fold increase the number of people contacting Women's Aid or Refuge. And that is incredibly humbling. So, yes, we're predominantly dramatists, but when you land on a story that actually helps people as well, and you accrue what I call good drama karma, that's one of my favourite things. And then equally emotionally challenging in a way, but obviously very different in tone, Paul's motor neurone disease story on Corrie I'm very proud of as well. In a similar way, really, I think it was paced incredibly well. It wasn't unremittingly bleak. I think the performances and the writing were excellent. It had some non-standard storytelling elements to it. There was an episode where Paul was by this point non-verbal, but the thing with motor neurone disease is that even though your body can't produce verbal content, your brain is still fully operational. And people, it seems, did not appreciate that about motor neurone disease until we put this episode on the TV where we allowed the viewers to hear Paul's inner monologue and hear the frustration he felt in, his brain's running in full speed, but his body won't allow him to communicate what he's thinking. And people contacted us to say, for the first time in the street, rather than people talking to my carer and saying, is he all right? And they'll now talk to me for the first time because they understand that, albeit I'm non-verbal, there's nothing wrong with what's going on in there. So again, in the same way as the Jeff Yasmin thing, it had a really positive impact on our viewers and on the world. So good drama, good karma, happy bunny from my point of view. So I'm picking those two examples out, but yeah, I prefer that to blowing stuff up. Blowing stuff up is loads of fun, don't get me wrong. And sitting in stunt recce's with the director, and the CorrieDale director, Duncan Foster's a good example of this. He'll turn up and he's got an aerial representation of the place, the location where we're doing the stunt, and he's got cars, little toy Matchbox cars that represent all of the character vehicles. And we spend about 4 hours going, so if this car's coming down here and it sees that, it will turn like this and then it will roll like that. And it's just like, we're grown men. We're just messing about with toy cars. And then seeing
and
that
explosions.
and explosions. And then seeing that when you're down there on the night all come to pass, and nothing goes exactly as you plan it, but for the large part, all the cars roll correctly and the explosions go up and look great. And it's tons of fun. But in terms of my legacy, if you ever think in those terms, the ones I'm more proud of is the kind of the social issue driven ones, I think.
How much then do you, particularly I suppose with Corrie, do you hark back to think what would Tony Warren have done or something like that, or are you now thinking this is me, we've got to move forward, or is there an element that history kind of weighs down on some soaps sometimes?
Good question. We always want to maintain as much of Tony Warren's Corrie DNA as we can, and essentially it's strong women, feckless men, working class lives, northern humour, and there has to be a place for that in Coronation Street. And the trick is the balance, because if you do solely that and you don't have any of the quote unquote bigger stories, what you're then relying on is people's habitual love for character only to bring them back tomorrow. And you do need bigger cliffhangers than you did 30 years ago, or perhaps not bigger, but more frequent. That's not to everyone's taste. And so what you have to then do is make sure that when you're not arm twisting them back for tomorrow with a massive cliffhanger, that you are entertaining them with Steve McDonald and Tim Metcalfe bickering over whose turn it is at the bar, and just normal kind of Corrie fare. So it needs to be both, and the balance has probably shifted a little bit, I would say, over the last even over the last 5 years. I mentioned people's viewing preferences changing post-pandemic, and that is very true. People now, if you don't sort of make them come back tomorrow, then they might just go, well, maybe I'll catch up. I'm not that bothered about what happens tomorrow to Tim and his denim jacket. But there's that thing I'm binging on Netflix, so I'll watch that.
Yeah.
So the competition is higher, and you have to be a little bit more arm twisty with your storytelling to make people come and watch. But no, we do think a lot about Tony Warren, and right up until his passing, he would be a regular visitor to Coronation Street. He'd have regular visitors, regular meetings with the producer, where he'd give you quite unvarnished opinions about bits that you thought were working and bits that you thought weren't. And so right, if he was still here, he'd still be having those meetings. So we do on Corrie certainly remain as true to what of his vision we can. Emmerdale's a different thing. Kevin Laffin obviously created a show that did incredibly well, but when it became Emmerdale post plane crash, it sort of revamped itself in a way that meant, I think, there are fewer of its original ingredients still in the mix now, which, it's a blessing and a curse in a way. It gives you the freedom to make it into the big, brilliant, crazy, sometimes quite gothic show it is today, but it does mean that you don't have quite the same legacy there to hark back to. And our viewers love it. If we find a story that taps right back into episode 1, that would be the absolute sweet spot for a Corrie viewer. And I even mean the ones that weren't even born in 1960, because people do immerse themselves in the lore and in the family trees of all these characters. And if we were to bring in one of Ken's siblings, of whom there are a few out there in the world, that would be an instant point of interest for our audience, even the younger ones. So it's a gift in a way to have that legacy of what Tony Warren created for us to play with today.
I'm interested in the audience thing, because you've been doing this for 20 years now.
Yeah.
It's a highly pressured job.
Mm-hmm.
You're the one at the top as well. So whenever there's a big story or a change or a cast member going or a cast member coming, or you're the one that they go, oh, he's done this, oh, he's done that.
Yes,
How difficult is it to remain? Because you've got the pressure not only of the turnaround of the production itself, but everything to do with Coronation Street or Emmerdale is going not necessarily front page, but sometimes front page of newspapers.
It can do.
How do you cope with that?
This won't please anyone that vociferously puts their point across on Facebook and things, but I try to ignore it a little bit. we do monthly audience research, which is very wide-ranging and very scientific, and that gives you a really good read on what the light viewer, medium viewer, heavy viewer, obsessive viewer thinks. And that's the barometer that we tend to use. What we've discovered, actually, I found this fascinating, but one of our market research team came into a presentation with me and said, me and the rest of the team, this was on Corrie at the time, who among you sort of looks on Twitter or X now to see what the viewers think about a particular episode or storyline or character? And everyone was like, yes, I do. And then she said, what percentage of the Corrie audience do you think uses Twitter? And we were like, ooh, I don't know, 30, we're trying to be conservative, 30% maybe. And she said, no, at this point, 1% of the Corrie audience actually uses Twitter. And of that, less than half use Twitter to talk about Coronation Street. So that massive avalanche of negativity or positivity you've seen about that storyline, and this was a number of years ago, and sure those numbers have changed now, but the point was those tweets represent a vanishingly small proportion of your audience, and that took the pressure off a little bit. So yes, I look at it, and it's always nice when it's nice, and it's less nice when it's not so nice. But I try to take it with a pinch of salt and read it to amuse myself, because some people, when they memify something that Ken Barlow's done or Eric Pollard's done, it amuses me greatly. So I watch it, I look at it mostly for amusement, and I try not to use it as market research because it's a bit unreliable. And
maybe just it's back like your journalism thing again. You kind of have that thicker skin maybe as well.
Could be, yeah. Once it's broadcast, it's done. There's nothing you can do about it now. It's gone. So, we're all soap fans, by the way, in the kind of upper echelons of each soap in terms of the editorial team and the production team, and we know what good soap looks like, and we know what we'd want to watch on our favourite shows, be they Corrie or Emmerdale, and we try to tell the best possible stories. And I've mentioned the market research. It's great, but it's retrospective. What we never do is say, "Hey viewer, what would you like us to do next?" and then try and design something that, is designed by a committee of 10,000 viewers. It just wouldn't work. So we have to trust our own instincts as Corrie fans or Emmerdale fans to know what will be good and what won't be good. And we've got a fairly good hit rate. Occasionally, I'll tell a story, and by the time it's finished, I'm like, well, thank goodness that's over, because it just hasn't gone over right, and sometimes that's execution, sometimes it's casting, sometimes it's just landed at the wrong time. Like, I was thinking the other day, somebody pitched something that was along the lines of Fatal Attraction. Those of you that are old enough will remember that 80s thriller directed by Adrian Lyne. If you watch it now, it's wildly misogynistic, and you could just never play that now, but it's considered to be a classic film. So sometimes you'll tell a story that it's just 5 years too late, and if you'd done it 5 years ago, the landscape would have been different and it would have worked, but doing it now, you go, oh yeah, it feels a bit dated. So that does happen, of course it does, and we all dust ourselves down and move on, but for the most part, I'm really proud of our hit rate.
I've got two more questions to ask you because we're running out of time, and one of them probably might get me slapped, and the other one's a long one. So let's go for the potential beating up one first.
Excellent. I'm not a violent individual, you'd be pleased to know.
That's good news, except with explosions and stuff like that. You've been in this soaps 20 years.
Yeah.
I have to ask you, and I think I'm deliberately annoying you here, but what about other dramas? Why have you stayed with soaps? Do you watch? You say you watch Netflix and probably Adolescents and things like that, and you thought you've got the background now that you could do anything. Why have you remained in soap?
I don't think that's sort of to insinuate that soap is somehow inferior. It's just different, and it's populist and it's popular, and therefore occasionally people can be quite sniffy about it, but if you want to make drama and see it on the television regularly, come and work on a soap. If you want to spend 3 years in development hell trying to make your passion project get off the ground and end up crying because no one wants to commission it, go and do something else. And I like the immediacy of it. I've talked so much about my journalism background, but one of the best things about journalism is the immediacy of it. It's happening now. By and large, I was doing current affairs, not opinion stuff. So you write it now about stuff that's happening now or has just happened, and then boom, it's published. And it's the same with soap, and it's exciting and fast-paced, and every single day you are making television. You're not just sitting around talking about making television or thinking about something you might want to make for television. You're doing it all the time, and it's I would recommend it to anybody. Iain MacLeod, when he came into Corrie, I wasn't actually on it at the time, annoyingly, but I was somewhere else. But when he came onto Corrie, somebody asked him a similar question about why on earth would you want to go and do that? And he got quite punchy about it, as I recall, saying, well, anyone that thinks it's somehow an inferior form of drama, I defy anybody that's trodden the boards at, the Globe to come here and see what these actors do day in, day out and tell me that it's somehow an inferior form of drama, because it's harder than anything else I've ever seen. And, I was like punching the air going, yes, Sir Iain MacLeod, I completely agree. So, if it's good enough for him, it's certainly good enough for me.
So there's still there is that notion that, they're a soap actor, or they're a soap...
Yeah, you do hear that. Yeah. What I think is really nice, though, is that I'm seeing the beginnings of that prejudice evaporating slightly, and people starting to see the immense skill that goes into making a soap. So, for example, Quay Street Productions, who are obviously making incredible stuff at the moment, have got quite a high proportion of former soap people working behind the scenes, some of whom I've worked with, and they're all massively talented. And it feels like they get it. They understand that soap people can come up with story idea after story idea after story idea. They're indefatigable. They don't have a thin skin about their ideas. They can turn things around incredibly quickly to a very high standard. They can work in a team. They can brilliant at talent management and working with writers. And so, I think Quay Street have for some time recognised the value in what soap gives you. And other people now, the main glass ceiling, oddly enough, is less about acting or behind the scenes. It seems to be directors, like soap directors have a hell of a hard time trying to get themselves hired on anything that's not a soap. And of the brilliant pool of directors we've got, there's only a handful that have even done things like Casualty, and trying to get onto something that's quote unquote more premium is almost impossible for someone that's directed soap as their primary career. So I'd like to see that change. I don't know what I can do to shift that, but if anybody is listening out there, if you want someone that can shoot your schedule twice over and make it brilliant, hire yourself a soap director. And there's lots of them, and I could give you a list that you should hire tomorrow.
Think about the budgets.
Well, yeah, exactly, and there's been the very beginnings of some of this moving with directors, is that I think Channel 5 have started to make drama in a slightly different band, and they're like, we need somebody that can essentially deliver premium-looking content, but do it on this budget and to this schedule, and the people that you need are soap directors, actually. So I know some of our directors have now had conversations around some Channel 5 dramas, because they're finally seeing the value in what a soap director can do. And I should add, by the way, soap once upon a time was all multi-camera, so it was sort of vision mixed live. It was shot a lot like an entertainment show. And we don't do that anymore. So we shoot essentially a normal drama model. So if people out there are thinking, who do I hire for my drama? Or I'll ignore the soap contingent because they film in a completely different way and it's less photographic and less cinematic and looks a bit like The Price is Right. It doesn't anymore. Look at their show reels, give them a chance. And I'm a strong advocate for the fact that those directors will knock your socks off.
I said 2 questions. I'm a journalist. I always ask 3.
That's fine.
And it just dawned on me then. We had Rope Ladder Fiction on here the other day, and one of the future plans he was hoping for Waterloo Road with Cameron was saying it could be another northern soap. Do you think Waterloo Road could be another join a northern party?
Yeah, I think so. I know a lot of the people that work there, and they're very, very talented. Some of them are former Corrie people, so they've got the chops in terms of the storytelling. I think they've got a brilliant young cast. I think it's got a USP in terms of its location and setting. It wouldn't feel like it was cannibalising the wider soap audience too much. It feels like it's got its own space. So why not? And with other shows falling by the wayside in the shape of Doctors and Holby, any additional continuing drama into the fold is a good thing. Like, we all want the genre as a whole to succeed. So I'd be dead up for that if they were to head into that in the future, then why the heck not? Yeah,
They're good neighbours of yours as well.
indeed,
now,
they are very close neighbours now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the final question, which kind of is probably the best one to end on, is a lot has changed in television, a lot of change in viewing habits as well. What happens next with the soaps under your control? Do you have to start thinking about all sorts of things, from the move to 4K potentially? Do you have to start thinking portrait as well as landscape, the way people are accessing soaps? Are all these conversations going on? What kind of future do you see for your soaps?
Top line stuff is obviously we're trying to balance the need for strong linear viewing figures with the inevitability of people migrating to ITVX. So it's funny. It feels like if you are solving one part of the problem, which is we want to boost our ITVX streaming numbers, then are we eating into our linear audience, which is obviously key for advertising. So that's a balance at the moment, but ultimately everything's going to move to ITVX, and actually the streaming numbers for both the soaps are astonishingly good over there. So I think you'll see gradual migration of viewership over to ITVX.
And YouTube as well. You've been doing
quite
a lot there.
There's quite a lot going on with YouTube at the moment. In terms of the ways in which people are consuming the content, I think that's inevitably going to change. I'm sure that'll be accompanied by headlines going, soap audience craters as ... But I would imagine when you look at it in more detail, the audience will be the same, hopefully better, but more of it is now on X. So I'm sure you'll see some negative headlines when the inevitable transition starts to happen more swiftly. Yes, we're doing more stuff on X. In terms of the kind of look and feel of the show, we're in the midst of a big piece of work around evolving what they both look like. I want there to be a somewhat consistent visual feel between the soaps, so you sort of know when you turn on Emmerdale or turn on Corrie that it's an ITV soap without homogenising it too much. But we're updating all of our kit basically in terms of cameras and post-production infrastructure and all the rest of it. And yes, there may be some news around shifting from HD slightly upwards in terms of the resolution that we're using. What we don't want is to be left behind. Like I said earlier on in the interview, you know, if your mum's now watching Squid Game on Netflix, you don't want those viewers to then turn on Coronation Street or turn on Emmerdale and it looks like a completely different century or genre even, you know. So we want to evolve our look so that it retains some of the cinematic flavours that we saw in CorrieDale recently. So that's all in train. We're also, as you would imagine, talking about things like micro dramas, vertical dramas. Is there any other parallel IP we can generate with a different set of characters that feeds into and out of the main show that will, we hope, engage a slightly younger audience and maybe then drive those younger viewers through
so
to the main
that
show.
That could be complete. That could run independently of the longer form show.
Yeah, exactly that. And we're exploring all kinds of options with that. The other one is, can we boil our 23-minute episodes down into a micro drama? That's proving more difficult because a lot goes on in the soap. But yeah, in short, what we're really keen to do is not just rest on our laurels. And what experience has told us is you can't go, well, people have been watching for 66 years, we'll just carry on blithely assuming they'll continue to watch, because it's much, much more competitive now than it was in the days when 23 million people watch Ken and Deirdre get married or whatever. So we are not complacent. We want to be forward-facing. We want to retain as much of Tony Warren's DNA in the show as makes sense for the 21st century, and as much of classic Emmerdale as applies over there as well. And just keep pushing forward, but sensitively. Like, if you go chasing after 18-year-old viewers, firstly, the 18-year-olds won't want it anyway because they'll smell that you're trying too hard. And secondly, everyone else that might commonly have watched the show will drift away. So we're trying to remain all things to all people, trying to modernise, make it look and feel better, tell our stories in a modern way, and ultimately keep the shows where they are, which is an under-trumpeted fact, but they are an incredibly successful product, whether you measure that against other ITV shows or against the wider media landscape. So we don't want to mess that up.
Exciting times then.
Should be, I hope so.
You got a lot on your plate.
Yes, indeed, yeah. And got a young family as well, so that's a challenge. My daughter's only now starting to become aware of she's coming up to 8 years old, but starting to become aware of what we do. And the other day, she made up a word. She's like, "Daddy, I don't like to swear because it's rude, but sometimes somebody annoys me a lot, so I just call them a clerp." And that way I know what I really mean, but it's actually not in itself rude. And I was like, that's a really imaginative way to deal with it. She went, "Can you get that in Coronation Street?" And I was like, well, maybe. Yeah, maybe. So watch this space. There might be a clerp coming to a screen near you soon.
That seems a brilliant way to end, because that means anybody watching this weekend, they will know the clerp that appears.
Absolutely.
They've already had the
insider knowledge.
Insider knowledge.
Yeah.
Thank you ever so much for
My pleasure.
making over from Trafford.
You're very
thank
welcome.
You very much.
Yeah, good to see you.
Thank you for watching This Is Media City. We are out every single week, and This Is Media City is a 39 Pictures production on behalf of Media City and in partnership with the University of Salford. And all the team behind the scenes are graduates and undergraduates of the University of Salford and the University of Manchester. The production team are Meg Bond, Tegan Easton and James Young.